This is the Mofi Sourcepoint 8. It's the second speaker that Andrew Jones has made with Mofi Electronics. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about this $3,000 pair of speakers. A $3,000 speaker may be a trigger for some people because this is the cheap audio man. But how can I accurately determine if affordable stuff is as good as expensive stuff if I don't listen to the expensive stuff? This speaker has come out maybe a year after the first Sourcepoints came out. Those were a little bit beyond my comfort zone as far as price. But when the Sourcepoint 8's came out at $3,000, $2,700, I felt a little bit more comfortable getting these in the house. Let's talk about some specs. Today we will talk about how they sound, but I'm going to do a direct comparison to the Wharfedale Linton as well as some other speakers. So if you want to see that video, make sure you subscribe and turn on all the notifications, the bell notifications, the pots and pans notifications, and give this video a like. It really helps out the channel. So if you're new here, please consider subscribing. As I said, they come in at $3,000, but that includes the stands. I don't know why you wouldn't want to get the stands because these need a pretty specific size when it comes to a stand. This is kind of between a traditional bookshelf and maybe something like a Klipsch Heresy or a KLH Mono 5 or something. So they're bigger than a bookshelf, maybe a little bit smaller than some of those other speakers. Anyway, the stands that Mofi makes really aren't that expensive, and they make sure they put them at the perfect height. Okay, you don't need to get them though. You'll save about 200 bucks. 8-inch twin drive concentric driver with a 1.25-inch soft dome tweeter in the middle. I think the woofer material is some type of paper, doped paper, some type of treated paper. The front baffle is faceted all the way around to reduce diffraction for more precise sound. At least that's what it says. Form-fitting faceted magnetic grills. Handles power between 30 to 100 watts. Frequency response 47 hertz all the way up to 30K. Nominal impedance of 8 ohms. Sensitivity 87 dB. Real wood veneer cabinets. Not fake wood veneer, real wood veneer cabinets. And I mentioned this in a previous video. The last feature on the Crutchfield website listing of this is designed by audio legend Andrew Jones. It's a feature. These come in 3 colors. They come in satin, black, ash. They come in satin, walnut. I was trying to say, I don't know, I think I saw satin and I was going to say Satan and satin at the same time and it came out weird. Satin walnut, which is the ones I have, which are gorgeous. Then it also comes in satin white. 3 color choices. What's on the back? On the back, you got 2 ports. You got a really nice label on the back and a pair of speaker binding posts, which are real nice. This is also a bit of a different design too, so it's not just a square on the top. It's kind of flared out. Look at that walnut. It's so pretty. Look at that port. Real nice black port. About the size of a Hot Wheel. Perfect size. Perfect size for a Hot Wheel to go in there. It drops down. I don't know how I know that. Not in this speaker. There's no Hot Wheels in this speaker. However, I do have other speakers with the same size port that do have Hot Wheels inside them. Pretty deep speaker. So it's 14.25 inches deep. 17, 15, let's just call it 18 inches high. And let's just call it 12 inches wide. Not a small speaker. Not a huge speaker. Not a small speaker. Let's talk about how they sound. I ran these mostly with the XPA Gen 3 differential DR1 mono blocks from Emotiva. Hooked up to the XDA3 differential DAC/preamp. My source was either the Weem Pro or an Apple 4K TV coming from my TV. I had these about 3 feet from the wall, 2.5 feet from the wall if you're measuring from the back of the speaker. I didn't really have the option to pull them way out in the room, so I put them where I put all my other speakers. Bass. Bass quantity was a huge surprise just how much there was. I also put these on the XDA Gen 3. I have a multi-channel amplifier, so it's 11 channels at this point. But for the left and the right speakers, it's a mono module. It's not like the differential though, because it's just one mono module. On the differential, you basically have two mono modules, one for the positive side of the sine wave and one for the negative side of the sine wave. A little bit more control. It sounded great on both, but for me, for my purposes, it sounded the best when it was on the DR1 differential monoblocks from Emotiva. So bass quantity, there's a lot of it. Bass quality, sublime. Probably the best I've heard, with the exception of maybe the CSS Audio 1TDX, which is a speaker kit. That kit comes in around $1,200 if you have all the higher tier options. Intergalactic by the Beastie Boys. Whew. Powerful, effortless. I think that's more of the amp though. But the Sourcepoint 8's didn't even break a sweat. That whole song is just with the bass. If you haven't heard it, just listen, because the low bass comes in almost immediately and is there for the entirety of the song. These were in the living room, which is my biggest room. I was feeling the bass in my chest and there was no subwoofer connected. Excellent job on the bass quantity. Bass quality and speed. My Name is Mud by Primus. Les Claypool, probably one of the best bass players out there. Bass tones, notes, strokes, plucks, whatever you want to call it, had a bite to it, but also had a bit of a caramel kind of finish. I know, we're talking super esoteric stuff now. There's an oaky finish. Actually, it's a walnut finish. See what I did there? For an 8-inch woofer, I was kind of scared that it wasn't going to be able to keep up, but man, oh man. Sublime. The tone, the texture, I think it's one of the more, if not the most realistic bass tone. One of the things I said about the Crichton 1TDX was that there is space. The bass was so good that I could actually hear space in the recording on the bass. And usually spatial cues for me come from the treble. But the Sourcepoint 8's had that same expansive sound and accuracy that I've never heard before, with the exception of maybe the CSS Audio 1TDX. Probably the best bass I've heard on a speaker. As far as tone, texture, clarity, space, it doesn't go down as deep as some of the other speakers, but the punch that it has is crazy awesome. I mean, it only goes down to 47. It sounded way lower than that for me. I did have it close to a wall, so I did have some boundary reinforcement, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the bass is a 10 out of 10 for me. Let's talk about mid-range. Mid-range for me, at first I thought it was a little bit veiled, but what happened is there was just too much bass coming out of the speakers. So I had to move them around just a little bit. I did get them pulled out just a bit. I actually put some acoustic panels behind it. I know they're not bass traps, but for whatever reason, I think it cut down on the reflection, so the bass actually got cut down a little bit, just perfectly. Mid-range is a bit caramelly. There's a bit of a vibe to it, but it's only kind of an idea of warmth and caramel. I think the mid-range here is neutral, but there's like this, I don't know, like an invitation from the speakers to come on in, sit down in front of the fire. Let's have a chat. Bob Marley, Redemption Song. The acoustic guitars, again, were a little bit on the thick side, but it was just an idea of thickness because they were still plucky. They were still, you could still hear the fingers on the frets. You could still hear the reverb from the strings, but it was just on the side of almost being warm. Brilliant mid-range. Male vocals had just a little bit more baritone. And there was no penalty with female vocals either. I think if I'm putting on my straight evaluation hat, male vocals may not be as accurate as female vocals, but for me, male vocals actually sounded not better, but more entertaining, I guess, than female vocals. Female vocals, perfection. Alanis Morissette, MTV Unplugged, her cover of King of Pain, no sibilance. We'll talk about that more in Treble, but her voice was articulate. Lena Hall, her cover of Creep, almost brought me to tears. It was so good because she goes way up, but then she comes way down like that. If you haven't heard that song, Lena Hall, Creep, please listen to it. It gives me the chills every time. Midrange, borderline perfect, if not perfect. Let's talk about treble. Initially, with so much bass going on, I had to tow these directly in at me, so the tweeters were facing directly at my ears. And when I did that, I got what I thought was enough treble going on. I don't think the treble matches the mid-range and the bass as far as the, oh my goodness, this is incredible aspect, but the treble is still awesome. It's just not as awesome as the mid-range or the bass. It's not fatiguing though, and it's definitely not sibilant. So Alanis Morissette, MTV Unplugged, cover of King of Pain, not sibilant at all. Harvester of Sorrow by Metallica, who incidentally, I'm seeing them this week in concert. 2 nights. Pantera is opening up one night. It's going to be really cool. Top end treble was believable. It was organic. It sounded real. It just didn't sound as in front as some other speakers can present it. Also lacked just the bit of air that I've heard on other speakers. But with the soft dome tweeter, I just think this treble is as in line as it could possibly be. You're only lacking a little bit of air. And the speakers that do provide that amount of air, and some of them, it's not even quite natural. Some of them are an aluminum dome or a titanium dome or an AMT, so it's not as natural. But some of those speakers will provide a little bit more air, but they don't have the overall package that the Sourcepoint 8's have. What are my final thoughts? Final thoughts. This speaker is incredible. Has a huge sound stage. However, the treble is very directional. So even though you're going to get a lot of sound coming from up and from around you, if you want that treble and you want a solid center image, you got to kind of toe these in just right. And to get the tonality that I wanted, I had to toe them in right at my ears. I think the bass can be a little bit much in some rooms. If you can get them pulled out a little bit from the wall. Even though it only goes down to 47 Hertz, it's a powerful 47 Hertz. Bass clarity, texture, probably the best I've heard. Mid-range clarity, mid-range engagement, incredible. Mid-range flavor is a work of art. It is neutral, but yet has just a little bit of flavor on the bottom, a sweetness. It's yummy. Top end is great, but it's not nearly as impressive as the mids and the bass. I think the more power you can get on the speaker, the better. I think the Emotivas I had on there were 300, 400, 500 watts. But what I think that kind of gave us was an effortless bass control, especially with and that could be the reason why the bass was so good and so fast, is because I had some differential monoblocks on here. When I had the regular XPA Gen 3, everything sounded good, but it wasn't as impressive as when I had the differential monoblocks and the differential DAC/preamp on it. If you have $3,000 and you're into a little bit more of a romantic speaker, I don't think this thing can be beat. There's not really another speaker that I can say, hey, this gives you kind of the same vibe, but it's less expensive. The closest thing is the Crichton, the CSS Crichton 1 TDX, but it doesn't have the massive throw on the soundstage. And from memory, I don't think the mid-range is as good. I don't have it here to compare it. So highly recommended if you have the budget for it. I'm going to do a comparison, a in-depth comparison with the Linton as well as some other speakers, so please subscribe so you don't miss that video. But on their own, this has been one of my favorite speakers that I've ever heard. Granted, I had about $4,000 of electronics in front of it, but if I'm going to listen to a $3,000 speaker, I want to have good electronics or excellent electronics on it. So check out my Patreon, check out the links in the description. Those are affiliate links. If you want to support the channel, you can buy me a cup of coffee. Use the thanks button below the video. And you can check out a bunch of my other videos. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen maybe through your new Mofi Sourcepoint 8's and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.